Viewer discretion is advised. The following content may contain material that some viewers find disturbing or offensive. While we strive to create content that is informative and engaging, the topics discussed today touch upon sensitive subjects. We believe in open discussion and exploring complex themes, but we also understand that certain content can be challenging for some individuals. Your well-being is our priority. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, please feel free to click away. We encourage you to proceed with caution and take care of yourself. For those who choose to continue, thank you for joining us in this important conversation. We appreciate your viewership and encourage you to follow our channel for more thought-provoking content.
I am the nation. I was born on July 4, 1776, and the Declaration of Independence is my birth certificate. The bloodlines of the world run in my veins, because I offered freedom to the oppressed. I am many things and many people. I am the nation. I am 213 million living souls, and the ghosts of millions who have lived and died for me. I am Nathan Hale and Paul Revere. I stood at Lexington and fired the shot heard around the world. I am Washington, Jefferson, and Patrick Henry. I am John Paul Jones, the Green Mountain Boys, and Davy Crockett. I am Lee and Grant and Abe Lincoln. I remember the Alamo, the Maine, and the Pearl Harbor. When freedom called, I answered and stayed until it was over. Over there, I left my heroic dead in Flanders fields, on the rock of Corregidor, on the bleak slopes of Korea, and in the steaming jungle of Vietnam. And I am the Brooklyn Bridge, the wheatlands of Kansas, and the granite hills of Vermont. I am the coal fields of the Virginias and Pennsylvania, the fertile lands of the West, the Golden Gate, and the Grand Canyon. I'm in Independence Hall, the Monitor. I am in the Merrimack. I am big. I sprawl from the Atlantic to the Pacific. My arms reach out to embrace Hawaii and Alaska, 3 million square miles. I'm more than 3 million farms. I am forest, field, mountain, and desert. I am quiet villages, and I am cities that never sleep. You can look at me and see Ben Franklin walking down the streets of Philadelphia with his bread loaf under his arm. You can see Betsy Ross with her needle. You can see the lights of Christmas and hear the strains of Old Lang Syne as the calendar turns again.
The secret founders of the Q operation were just revealed. In early 2017, high-level elements of the Trump admin launched a plan they claimed would bring down The deep state. By allowing whistleblowers to release information anonymously, 10 years later, Alex Jones reveals what the bad guys are desperate to hide from the people of America and the world.
And so now I am going to reveal to you the true origins of the Q movement, all the rumors, all the movies, all the books, all the speculation, all of it, horse crap. Now, the WikiLeaks came out. I didn't know Julian Assange. We weren't involved with him, but Roger Stone was starting to work at InfoWars in 2016. And he'd heard through Randy Credico that knew Assange that they were going to release bombshell stuff on Hillary. He didn't know the specifics. And we were trying to get a hold of Assange, trying to get him on, just the big guess. This is what you do in talk radio and TV. Later, they indicted Roger for lying to Congress, saying that he wasn't involved with WikiLeaks, which he wasn't. I was there. I know. I was like pressuring him to, try to get him on. And so, but we were really good. We had a lot more reporters and crew then. Paul Watson, when the WikiLeaks came out, you didn't have AI to go over it. Millions of pages. Watson just stayed up for like 3 days and broke like 20 huge stories or more. And Drudge was linking to all of them. I mean, one article had like 20 million readers in one day. And it was just boom. And the Democrats decided, they said, okay, Jones is working with another group of the CIA or something. This is too sophisticated. They opened a national security investigation on us. They got declassified, came after me hardcore. You know the rest of the story. And really, we were just not lazy and knew how to go in and search stuff and get it out. And Drudge was a big fan and so was publishing. And it was just that. And other people were getting it too. It just wasn't. I mean, we had like an article an hour coming out with millions of readers and viewers. I mean, hundreds of millions of views a day. Just dominant, biggest show ever. Just, Joe Rogan, hold my beer. Number one, undoubtedly. We were already number one, but it was like number one to the next order. And I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you about that time and what happened. And then thousands of articles a week attacking us, and hundreds of TV programs attacking us, and just total insanity. So I'm talking to Trump a lot at the time when he's president-elect. And I'm talking to his crew, and I'm talking to his people. And right after the inauguration, 2017, and I'm not going to name names on these people, I'll name the big names. I get contacted by people I know that work at the White House, and they said, listen, we saw the trouble you're getting putting out the WikiLeaks. And I'm like, hey, we didn't put that out. We discovered it. No, we know that. But imagine if you could do that through like 4chan or 8chan, but also kind of add some treasure hunt to it, some game theory to it. That's what it is. It's Dungeons and Dragons, basically. That's what the Q stuff is. And then you don't get any of the heat or attacks, but then all this stuff we've got on them, we can feed out, and then you can boost it. Would you like to be involved? And I said, well, who's running this? I said, well, Trump knows, and Steve Bannon's managing it. And I said, okay, yeah, I'll meet with you. Months go by. Then I get a visit down here in Austin, Texas by some White House people. And I'm at my house, and Rob Dew was there. And we're out on my back porch. It's in the, I guess it's in the February or whatever it was. It was still cold. We had a fire going. There's a pool table out there. We're playing pool. And they're like, yeah, so we want to work with you, and you can boost the stuff, and you can have ideas and stories you're working on, but we can get it, add intel to it, and put it out and not have any of the heat. And I said, Anonymous has been out forever. It's a Guy Fawkes mask, and anybody can put it on. And people always ask, is Anonymous real? Well, it's just a guy in a Guy Fawkes mask. 1 billion people could be anonymous. It is anonymous. You never know who it really is, so you can't say is anonymous good or bad. It's whatever the person's saying, whoever's saying they're anonymous. I said, I've never worked with a party. I've never worked with an agency. This person's been in intelligence. I said, I'm sorry. I said, if you got some big story, you want me to boost it, I can vet it. I'll be happy to boost it, but I'm not getting involved. And, Rob Dew was there at the meeting. He can vouch for all that. And I said, that's it. But I said, thank you very much. It's kind of like Don Corleone said, the best for your business. I wish you luck, but when this business is a little too dangerous, I'm not going to be part of that. Well, thank you very much. So that happened. And then I'm not really covering the Q thing, but 8 months later, 10 months later, whatever it was, I get some calls, and they said, listen, it got taken away from us, just like you said. And now the bad guys have it, and it's not good anymore. I'm like, well, what do I do with that? And I really wasn't covering it, but it was becoming this sensation. You have shots on Air Force One and shots of this to add credibility to it. And people don't want to ever have clear answers. Like, here's actual legislation to build FEMA camps, put you in them. But if you hear a rumor of, people love it. I wasn't really covering all the Q stuff at the time. And then I started kind of going, well, now, folks, it can be taken control of, and maybe there's some good Q people and some bad Q people, but I was just on my own trying to, like, not repeat what I've been told. I was just told, watch out for it, but at the same time, kind of just market for people to say, hey, anybody could say they're this, like anybody could say they're anonymous. Anybody could wear a IRA shirt like the British intelligence used to do and then shoot videos saying horrible things. Or, anybody can go attack their own synagogue or their own black church and say some white guy did it. I mean, you can false flag this. And so we saw all that go on and all that happen. And then so many people didn't vote in 2020 because they thought Trump was invincible and couldn't lose. And I had, famous CIA guys like Pachenik telling me, oh, no, Q's real. It's all great. You should get behind it. And then I wouldn't do it because I'm the people that started it. And they said, look out, it's been co-opted. And so that I all get attacked by, people that are involved, down low that, think they're part of some secret thing and they're not. And then I saw Kurt Metzger over the weekend on his show with Duncan Trussell here in Austin. Really funny comedian, great analyst, co-host with Jimmy Dore. Nail it and say what it was. Now, his interpretations of Bannon and stuff might be wrong, but I already, in the last 5-6 months when all these Jeffrey Epstein files came out, 3+ million, saw Bannon in there with Epstein, the founders of 4chan, 8chan, the other big similar things, meeting with them, going to meetings, talking about how they're using it for political purposes. And I started thinking, I'm like, was it always going to be used to attack the real patriots? And then I'm just told, oh, we lost control of it, so I wouldn't think it was them doing bad things with it. And I'm not saying that. We need Steve Bannon to respond to this because I'm not letting the cat out of the bag. I don't give up confidences on something unless what's going on is illegal. So I need to be able to have these meetings with different groups and people, with my journalistic hat on. But when I saw that Metzger got it and others had figured it out, I was just like, well, now's the time, because I almost talked about this in the last 6 months when all the Epstein stuff was coming out, because there is Bannon, there is Epstein, right when, they're starting the 4chan and the 8chan with the heads of it, and then right when they say we're going to be political now with this, right when Trump wins, and I was read in on this, not that Epstein was involved, but that Bannon and Trump were running it, and then here's the adjuncts under it, and they wanted me to work with it, and I said, no thanks, because I'm not going to join any group so I can be totally independent. That's a very important thing, because then once you do that, it's like, hey, buddy, you work for us. No, I'm independent. So, I'll work with people when they got good information I can vet. I'll collaborate, but I ain't under your flag. Just, no, sir. So then, anybody wants to look into this doesn't know about it. There's articles about it. They don't really fully get it. Some get part of it. But you can just go into the Epstein, the big data dump of 3 million plus files 5-6 months ago, and it's hundreds and hundreds of emails. And Steve Bannon is the second most talked to person in there by Epstein. Thousands and thousands of communications. And look, he never made a secret that he knew him. He was heavily politically powerful. I knew he worked for the Trial Commission starting in 91 when he was like 29. I didn't realize that by the mid-2000s, he was really sitting in for David Rockefeller, the head of the Trilateral Commission, and he basically was the head of the Trilateral Commission. So Alex Jones is not always right. Epstein was way more powerful than even I knew. So obviously Bannon's this political guy. He wants populist movements, all this stuff he's pushing, I think, from a real place. Well, then you go to that phantom head, the shadow head of the Trilateral Commission, to get that done. And I'm not making an apologist for him. I'm saying I knew some of that was going on, but not the hugeness of the relationship when it came out. And imagine what we don't know. So it just gives you a look into this whole underworld, there in Gotham. So I'm told by the people that set it up 8 months into it or 9 months, whatever it was, that, it's been taken away. You better watch out. And like you said, just let people know it's just like anonymous. Anybody can say they're Q. People got to be careful. And I was like, well, that's fine. I never really messed with it. So, okay, I just cover stuff I can prove. But now that you have this Epstein involved day one and going to conferences and going and meeting and going and staying with the founder of 4chan and 8chan and these other groups and Reddit, and trying to control the minds of young men and all the rest of it. All I'm saying is that that's where it came from. It did come out of the first Trump administration. They tried to recruit me into it in front of Rob Dew, witness, and I didn't like the feeling of it, just didn't like it, and said, no, thank you. I don't deal with esoteric stuff or Gnostic stuff. Again, people love something they can't really prove. They love an Easter egg hunt. They love a scavenger hunt. They love a war game. And they talk about themselves in the Epstein files as like dungeon masters and D&D and gaming theory. That's what it is. But you take a real world of politics and geopolitics and military and culture, and then you create a game version where you control the rules by the inputs. You're the dungeon master. You're the guy that controls the game. You're the guy that is the referee. And now you can direct people believing they're in a secret army or a secret group under the command of the president, and that you're being given secret esoteric knowledge. And in truth, you are in a group created by the president. But then now it's been captured, they tell you, by this other group and starts doing all this embarrassing and bad stuff. And RFK or JFK Jr.'s coming back, and you'll be at Dealey Plaza, and Biden's going to be executed in public. At the inauguration 2021. None of that's true. None of that's real. And so I don't know who the good guys are and the bad guys. I'm not blaming anybody because I don't know enough about all the little inside things on it. I just know who started it. I know where it came from. And indeed, it did come out of the first Trump administration. And now that type of thinking is all over the place. And the Democrats have their blueing on. And you deserve to know what it is. And so that's the facts. And that's what I told you. And then when the people at the White House that created it told me it's not good now, I come out and say it's not good now, and then I get attacked. Was that even a setup to get them to attack me? I don't know. But we'll be back with the Kurt Metzger clip that got me going on this. Stay with us. So I'm not giving out any confidences here because this is already basically coming out. People figured it out. It's in the Epstein files. But now I want Bannon and other people who have the rest of the answers to explain themselves. That's all. Because all I know is Epstein's involved. That's a whole other ball game. And then now I'm very suspicious about how the whole thing played out and what I was told and what was done. So here's some headlines. Epstein met with 4chan's founder just as the site's infamous political thread began. Yeah, that's all true. And there's all these hundreds of emails, them talking about it, meeting and Bannon and, all the rest of it right when I was contacted and all this stuff went on. So, here's just some of the headlines if you want to look all this stuff up. So, if you go back to the Operation Trust with the White Russians and the Tsars, they had a secret society against themselves so they could recruit everybody into it and then control the opposition. You just go to Wikipedia and look up Operation Trust. We put that on screen. So, again, I don't know all the specifics. I don't know all the details. All I know is I told you years ago what it was. I told you what I was told. I told you it came out of the White House. Now I'm naming names. And if people want to say what I've said is not accurate, then please elaborate. Because this is a big deal. Now, here's what Kurt Metzger said on the full interview. He went into it more. He's on the show next week. But he figured it out just reading the emails. So I contacted him, and he's sending me over a dossier of more research him and his team are putting together. He also co-hosts with Jimmy Dore. And we're just researching this and throwing this out to all of you to research it and see what you come up with to try to understand what it was really all about and where it's all going and this type of technology of game theory they're using in politics to create a copy of the real thing, but to manipulate the general political system with that to then interface with the real political system once you've created a false template that you control as the dungeon master. Here's Kurt Metzger.
This is not a LARP. It's not a LARP, dude. This is an actual religion.
Can I explain it to you? I'd love to. Okay, so the LARP of it. So as you know, QAnon was invented by Jeffrey Epstein and Steve Bannon. It's in the files. The precursor to QAnon was called Cicada. And that was an online puzzle.
I remember that.
That was a beta test of QAnon.
No shit.
Epstein's a big gamer, you'll notice. And when he's talking about MK Ultra shit.
Yeah.
Jay Dyer was talking to this chick, Courtney Smith or Brown. Very, very good guest we should get. And he was like, I think you're the first person to, but no, I was on this podcast that no one's ever seen. I brought it up. So a lot of video game creators involved because you have, so here, I'll put it this way. I learned this about Jehovah's Witnesses that I was in. So Jehovah's Witnesses there's not like a head guy that you worship like a god or anything, you know. The founder, Charles Taze Russell, from the Russell bloodline, and that's important because your final OTO or Golden Dawn or whatever thing is to invent a religion. That's your final class project.
Yeah.
All of these, especially what LaVey was doing, all of them, all of them are all about slavery. So basically, when they talk about being a rebel and this and that, they mean for them. They mean for them. And if you're too stupid to see it, you deserve to be a slave. That's why one of the secret commandments of Satanism is don't be stupid, literally. I got this from Mark Passio, the ex-LaVey. He had a grotto in Philly.
What do you mean he had a grotto? What do you mean a grotto?
Your parish is called a grotto in the LaVey church.
That's what they call their churches? Grottos?
Know this?
Did not know that.
Called a grotto, like the Playboy Mansion had. Yeah, a grotto.
Oh.
An underground fuck palace. It's serpent shit. Anyway, they're not, LaVey's not an atheist. If you're an atheist, okay, you could be a Satanist who's an atheist. There's all kinds, Sam Harris, for example. You don't have to.
Sam Harris is a Satanist?
De facto. Automatically de facto.
You mean from your interpretation, he's a Satanist?
No, Satanism is about being, first of all, Sam Harris, no free will. He supports all kinds of objective physical evils, such as killing and shit. That's de facto Satanism. The good thing about Satanism.
But he wouldn't call himself a Satanist.
Well, you don't have to. That's what's so great about Satanism.
What?
It's just pure materialism. You don't have to believe in nothing. That's fine. Believe in you. You're God. You understand the appeal?
But I mean, I'm just saying, like, Sam Harris, like, most Satanists I've met, they're just.
I will
they're
come back
Satanists.
with Jay Dyer to talk about this on the other side. But I told you where it came from. That's a fact. We'll be right back.
Hi, folks.
Do not mistake my silence for lack of grief. This pain, it fuels me. It will not break me. It will make me stronger.
You think the world survives on soft words and trembling hands? Huh! Humanity does not need poets who whisper comforts in the dark. It does not need cowards who kneel before false gods of comfort and convenience. Humanity needs strong men. Men who rise when every bone screams for rest. Men who carry the weight of broken worlds upon their shoulders and do not beg for release. Nocturne blood.
Spartan blood forged in war, tempered in betrayal, and reborn through loss.
I am Kratos. By voices that call discipline cruelty, protection toxicity, and sacrifice selfishness. They know nothing of the burdens I carry. I will not be judged by the weak. Who stands between the weak and the wolves at the gate? Who builds when the earth shakes and the skies fall? Who teaches the young not to flinch at pain, but to master it?
He is the wall. He is the blade. He is the father who refuses to break, so his son may one day stand taller.
Look around you, mortal. Empires crumble not when their armies fall, but when their men grow soft, when they trade spears for screens, hardship for excuses, duty for distraction. When boys are told their fire is a flaw to be extinguished rather than a forge to be honed. I have slain gods who thought themselves eternal. I have walked through hells of my own making. And I tell you this, a world without strong men is a world already conquered. A graveyard of forgotten potential, waiting for the next tyrant to claim it. Break the chains of weakness before they bind your children. Shatter them with all your strength. Do not let them suffer as I have. I am Kratos, ghost of Sparta, Godslayer, father, and I say to you, become the monster they fear. Become the strong man this broken world demands, or watch it die. What say you?
They support communism. They let you know, the elders of Zion, they support communism, obviously. Again, this was supposedly written before any communist nations existed, before they had established the Bolshevik Revolution or anything of the sort. So, again, it's interesting the way this played out. The people under our guidance have annihilated the aristocracy, who were their one and only defense and foster mother for the sake of their own advantage, which is inseparably bound up in the well-being of the people. Nowadays, with the destruction of the aristocracy, the people have fallen into the grips of merciless, money-grinding scoundrels who have laid a pitiless and cruel yoke upon the neck of the workers. So again, you sort of see where they're using the claims of communism and sort of portraying themselves as the rescuers from these exploitative, industrial masters. But who are the industrial masters that are exploiting them? It's also you, right? They say, we appear on the scene as alleged saviors of the worker from this oppression, where we propose to him to enter the ranks of our fighting forces, socialists, anarchists, communists, to whom we always give support in accordance with the alleged brotherly rule of the solidarity of all humanity of our social masonry. Last time I covered this, I had people responding saying, you've got to mention how the Masons play into all of this. And yes, Freemasonry, secret societies do play into all of this very closely. The aristocracy, which enjoyed by law the labor of the workers, was interested in seeing that the workers were well-fed, healthy, and strong. We are interested in just the opposite, in the diminution, the killing out of the goyim. Our power is in the chronic shortness of food and physical weakness of the worker, because by all this implies he is made the slave of our will. He will not find his own authorities, either strength or energy to set against our will. Hunger creates the right of capital to rule the worker more surely than it was given to the aristocracy by the legal authority of kings. Again, I don't think we need to elaborate on this too much. I think it's pretty self-evident how this, and again, it does make sense. I'm not even saying they're wrong in what they're saying. This is the natural course of events. It's just evil. It's just evil. It's true. If you make people hungry, they'll do what you say. It's not that complicated. If you want to maintain your power, regardless of like the reason you have your power, I would think if I had power like a king or something like that, I would want to use it to the benefit of the people, one would think. But if your only concern is that power, and if you're jealously guarding that power against even the possibility of somebody rising up to take it, then yeah, you would make everybody beneath you weak and miserable and incapable of fighting back and stupid, right? Or you can make them happy. You can make them happy and stupid. There's lots of ways to oppress people, and you can oppress people by fulfilling their wishes, right? By giving them what they want. It's a very effective way of controlling people. You can also control people by making them weak and desperate and hateful and miserable and stupid. But regardless, the one thing you don't want is people that are intelligent, strong, thoughtful, independent, right?
Darkness wraps the world. Soft voices whisper comfort, while the masses seek distractions in trembling hands, shielding themselves from pain. A weathered figure rises in a field of ruin. His eyes burn with conviction, unmoved by the gentle calls for ease and convenience. He scorns the poets of weakness, voices that would soothe rather than steal the hearts of men, and shames those who kneel to false gods of comfort. Images of history flicker, Spartan warriors forged by battle, men scarred by betrayal, forged anew by their losses. With every step, bones ache, yet he stands tall, carrying unseen burdens without plea or complaint, resolve evident in his frame. A world crumbles quietly, not by swords, but by cheap luxury, discipline labeled cruel, protection branded as toxic, sacrifice twisted as selfishness. He gazes over a city in decline, wolves circling the vulnerable, his stance unyielding, defiant against the collapse. Flash of fathers building walls, hands bleeding as they defend the weak from the oncoming storm, teaching sons that pain is a teacher, not an enemy. Boys are shown staring at screens, their fire snuffed by society's disapproval, told to fear their own strength instead of nurturing it. Flames spark in smithies of old, strength is not given, but tempered in sweat, blood, and relentless will. Images of broken men trading tools for devices, embodying the rot that eats away at nations from within. The strong man becomes the unbreakable wall, a living blade, a father who stands so that his children may rise higher. Through memories of God-slaying and trials endured, the figure, Kratos, emerges battered but unbeaten. His voice thunders, become the monster they fear, the sentinel this fractured world so desperately requires. Final shot, Kratos, alone but undaunted, staring into the camera. His challenge, will you rise, will you carry the world, or watch it die?
Hidden history, these porn psyops by the elite are insane! Jay Dyer reveals social engineering programs put into place to encourage sexual depravity and degrade nations. These are deliberate control mechanisms.
So So I was going to talk about some of the stuff that you mentioned, actually kind of, again, adjacent to what you're discussing history-wise, because I finally finished this big CFR book that I've been reading for several weeks. It took me forever to finish it. It's called The Old Boys by Burton Hirsch, The American Elite and the Origins of the CIA. The book works its way all the way up to about the 1960s and 70s. So it kind of ends with Bay of Pigs and JFK. And what's amazing about this book, and it's very long and boring and technical, it's very difficult and weird prose as well. But Burton Hirsch was a important member of the Council of Foreign Relations. And so he's writing this text from the intelligence archives, from the National Archives, from Dartmouth, from Yale, Harvard archives. So it's another high-level geopolitical text from the elite.
Yeah, the globalists like to write their own history books for themselves.
They do. But this is so important because everything that we've talked about, whether it's the Rothschilds and their relationship to the American oligarchical elite of the families, the Rockefellers, et cetera, or whether it's the regime change, coup operations, all of what's happening right now, whether it's Ukraine or whether it's Iran, all of that, it was already kind of happening in the 20th century. So the U.S., the CIA, the OSS, the alliance with the Israelis, the WASP Zionist alliance, as it's known as, that all occurred a few decades ago under people like James Jesus Angleton. When he took over a lot of these CIA operations after people like Dulles and Donovan and Wisner, Angleton was able to really finagle a new relationship to not just the Israelis and the Mossad, but also to the Vatican. And so that was a huge role that he played. And so when we look at the JFK files and we see that he's got this back channel with the Mossad and they're discussing JFK, to me, that's a big indicator that, of course, Israel had a role in the taking out of JFK. And I think a lot of people suspected that. There were many books written about that over the years, but the files kind of pointed more so in that direction. And this book, again, is just another confirmation. It's not saying that Angleton planned the assassination, but that there was a role that he played with giving information to the Mossad. I mean, it gets crazier and crazier, too. You've got the top SS people and people in Hitler's military assassination units. You've got Otto Skorzeny and you've got Reinhard Gehlen. That whole network that Gehlen had set up of the Nazi networks throughout Europe, that's the same network today in Ukraine that the CIA uses in their operations against Russia. And that, by the way, also connects to Zionism because they're calling the Ukraine a new Israel. So there's a large Israeli component to what's happening in the Ukraine. And it gets even more bizarre because they've been using the, quote, neo-Nazis, who are the real authentic Nazis that have been there since World War II. In fact, the OSS was using the Nazis in Ukraine in the 1940s. They were trying to flip those people against first Hitler. And then when they took over Reinhard Gehlen's networks, the famous SS intelligence operative, they just rolled all that into the CIA. And the only reason I say that is that shows you that there's really not good guy, bad guys here. This is power relationships. So if you've got the top SS guy who's training the Mossad, and you've got Otto Skorzeny, he goes and trains the Mossad. These are top Hitler dudes. They're training the Mossad. They also go and establish modern Egyptian intelligence. The entire Egyptian intelligence structure was set up by the Nazis, by the CIA. The CIA is sending Reinhard Gehlen and Skorzeny to go set up these networks. So who's the good guy, bad guy here, right? Because all the people want to worship Hitler now, and Hitler's supposedly a good guy. And I'm not saying that we haven't been taught this, false boomer narrative about World War II, that, all the allies are only the good guys and everybody else was bad. All those other people deserve to die. It's much more complicated than that. And you had a lot of subterfuge, you had a lot of manipulation on the part of corporations and banks that wanted these wars. And it's the same today, right? It's not, just guys in Washington making a call about whether we need to go to war or not. Wars are planned decades ahead of time. They're planned for, years ahead of time. And they're usually for the benefit of the military industrial complex. They're usually for the benefit of other nation states. And in this case, in the Middle East, it's largely for the benefit, obviously, of Israel and the Greater Israel Project. It's odd, too, that we even have to debate this or talk about it when the plans were public for years. It was Ariel Sharon's, I think he was Secretary of State, Oded Yanon. He wrote the Greater Israel Project plan back in the early 80s. And then by the time of BB in the late 90s, you had the clean break strategy, which essentially updates that and expands it and says, here's the plan for these other countries around us. And then by, the 2000s, you essentially have another version of this being said again. Netanyahu saying we've got to get all these countries. And he said the same thing for so many years that it's odd that we would even have to really discuss or debate this. But this just shows us that our world is actually run by these types of people. It's run by NGOs, think tanks, foundations, intelligence operatives, and they don't work at the behest of the people. So when we talk about the deep state, when we talk about this kind of stuff, and when Trump says, well, I'm going to drain the swamp, well, there's a challenge there that is an entrenched bureaucracy that you can't just drain because it's a breakaway security state. It's a breakaway establishment that's not really accountable to the politicians. So there's a limited effectiveness that a single politician can actually do. And that's why, because of our, decentralized sort of governance system, which is a good thing, there's also a limitation in terms of what the politicians and the political class, or even the juridical class, what they can actually do when it comes to these privatized international banking and corporate cliques and networks. And the other thing too is that it's not just about America and socialism. It's also an international plan to change the face of the world for a long-term technocratic strategy. We've covered that for a long time. But what's amazing, again, is that when you read these sort of older CIA books and these strategy books and the Mossad books too, I'm not trying to say you can't read Victor Ostrovsky's books or whatever. They say pretty much a lot of the same stuff. That's what's so wild, is the admissions that the strategies, the plans, the techniques, they're not hidden. They're actually private. I mean, they're public and private. It's a public-private strategy, I think, is what they decided to go with. So, again, you have the admission, something that I've been talking about for a while, which is that Keynesian economics, which is a kind of Fabian socialist economics, is the economics of the 20th century. It's the post-World War II Bretton Woods system is Keynesianism. It's essentially the money printing system of war-based economy, debt-based economy, expanding the money supply type, inflation-based economy, and that's existed since the Second World War. And it was the banking elites, that Bernard Baruch, these kinds of people, that set up the post-World War II system. In fact, Bernard Baruch was there at many of these meetings, post-Bretton Woods, et cetera, to structure the economy and the debt system that we have in the world. It was the banking elites that decided what type of reparations to put the Axis nations under when they lost World War II. And the purpose of that was not to heal anything or help people. It was actually to ensure that they would be in perpetual debt servitude. In fact, all of Germany after World War II underwent a radical psychological warfare re-education program to train the Germans to be agrarian and to not be involved in engineering, and to basically kind of be neutered and pacified, because the Allied powers were concerned of a return of a war power type of Germany. I'm not pro Hitler. I'm just saying that's a fact. That's the historical record. And you had the same situation in the West too, with America kind of being this engine for the global elites. And this is the transnational Atlanticist power bloc, which has a very powerful faction, obviously, of Zionists and Israelis. In fact, the whole Zionist project was not really a project until the Rothschilds got behind it. Once the Rothschild money was behind it, originally in the 1800s, and it had the support of people like Moses Hess, there wasn't a lot of support. It was just kind of an idea that some they're not even really religious Jews, but some quasi-religious Jews had to set up a new sort of religious locale originally for pilgrims or Jewish pilgrims to go. But then it gradually morphed into more of a socialist political project, and it took a long time for the Rothschilds in general, and especially Edmund de Rothschild, to actually get on board with it. And that's why we have the Middle East that we have today, is this whole Rothschild structure. They pretty much ended up taking over the British Empire. So this is the Alex Jones Show. I'm your guest host, Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis. This is the deep state in history. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
I want to start with sexual Tyrannosaurus Rex. This is rocket fuel. This is incredible. This is rocket fuel. Because I'm a sexual Tyrannosaurus Rex. This is a cocktail I drink every day. a squirt of ultramethylene blue and T3. You are insane if you don't get it. Insane if you don't get it. Okay? Oh, listen. Oh, listen. You are insane if you don't get it. Insane if you don't get it. I am a wrecking ball. I am obsessed with this. I can't stop. And now I'm having this. And now I'm having this. Because I'm a sexual Tyrannosaurus Rex. This is the truth. Because I'm a sexual Tyrannosaurus Rex. You understand that? Does that burn into your brain?
I think I'm going to buy some methylene blue now.
AlexJonesShore.com.
The most banned man in America, Alex Jones.
I want you all to know something. Alex Jones was right.
Alex is right about far more than he's wrong.
Alex has been right on for over a decade.
I don't care how you slice it, dice it, flip it up, or rub it down. Alex Jones was right.
Think about how frustrated we are if you've been awake for a year or two. Imagine being like an Alex Jones or those guys who've been awake for like decades.
Alex Jones called this years ago.
Alex Jones never bought the Russia hoax, not for a second.
You are one of the great thinkers of this.
You are a martyr to the First Amendment.
The government fears Alex Jones.
That's why the globalists hate me, is because I'm exposing their corporate worldwide tyranny.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm your guest host, Jay Dyer, Jay's Analysis. You can follow me on X and on YouTube under Jay Dyer. I do live streams almost every day, sometimes every other day. Just did a really in-depth interview with Kat Von D, the famous LA tattoo artist who has now become an Orthodox Christian. If you want to go to my channel, you can check out that full-length in-person podcast interview that we did. I think it came out pretty good, but we're talking about the actual structure and history of the deep state, that out of the World War II era, we have a structuring of the entire global economy on the basis of Keynesian economics, money printing, and particularly here we're talking about the Sullivan and Cromwell law firm that was a conduit for so many CIA operations that included the Dulleses. And that early on you had the Schroeder Bank, which was the Nazi bank originally. But after World War II, this gets converted into basically the structure of the Bank for International Settlements. So the BIS ends up becoming ultimately a mysterious, unknown bank. We don't know who really owns it or has anything to do with it. My guess would be that it's a JP Morgan Rothschild international bank now, but regardless, the same people that structured the OSS in America, the British intelligence operatives, were pretty much the same people, together with Dulles, McKittrick, and others, who go and set up the international banking structure post-World War II. So we've been under that structure for many, many decades. And you could say that it's ultimately the Rothschild Fabian socialist structure. When I say Fabian socialism, that's the structure that Lord Milner, Lord Curtis, and Lord Rothschild all together said would be the future governance model of the world. That was their plan under after Cecil Rhodes and others. They wanted to bring the British Empire back. And some of those people were actual sort of Anglo supremacists. They really believed in the British Empire. Others were more so Zio supremacists who believed in a weakening of the British Empire and a international socialism, Fabian socialism, not the Trotsky style socialism per se, although there is evidence that the Rothschilds also supported, perhaps in some capacities, the Bolsheviks in some degree. There was a faction of the family that also didn't, but some of that's unclear. But regardless, we have the secret government that exists, you could say, that's a shadow banking empire. And we got a glimpse into this with Epstein, if you recall, when Epstein was giving email instructions to Larry Summers, who you would think understands international banking, but it's Epstein who's actually explaining to Larry Summers how the Vatican Bank works, and that the Vatican Bank is actually part of this same international shadow banking empire, because much like the Bank for International Settlements, the Vatican Bank has no oversight. It's an independent city-state, the Vatican city-state. And so its bank is notoriously free from any kind of oversight, whether it's the Italian government or the EU. I'm not pro-EU. I'm just saying there's not a lot of peering into that. So it became, especially after World War II, a very useful tool under particularly Paul VI and other popes, particularly John Paul II, when it came to the Cold War, a very important conduit for moving money to a lot of CIA operations. The same, you had histories that have been written of organizations like Opus Dei. They fit into the same type of structure being utilized during the Cold War. And I'm not a pro-Soviet, but the whole point of when I say that kind of stuff is, or I'm not a communist, it's just that when you put yourself kind of in league in that way, when you hitch yourself to the organization of the CIA in such a close capacity, and the same goes for the Mossad as well, it's not that even if you're fighting some common enemy or something like, oh, we got to fight the communists. Well, now you're stuck. You're in bed with that. Now you're on the hook to them. And that also explains so much of what's happened post Vatican II in the Roman Catholic world. It's not just theology. It's not just questions of spurgs who read, medieval Latin theology all day. It's also a question of geopolitical power and who's putting pressure on the papacy to do this or that. And again, I mentioned, there's a book written on the history of the Mossad by Gordon Thomas, the journalist. And there's several chapters that deal with the eventual recognition of the nation state of Israel by the Vatican, which the Vatican was very hesitant to do. They didn't do that until, I want to say, the 80s, late 80s, mid to late 80s. And that's precisely because when John Paul II became the Pope, because he had such a long-term affinity with rabbinic Judaism, and his best friend being Jerzy Kluger. There are many books written on how close John Paul II was to rabbinic Judaism. They were able, I think, at least on the part of Israel, to realize that we could have a recognition and inroad through John Paul II. They also tied that into the Cold War as well, even though they had tried to bug the Vatican. But after some of these meetings between John Paul II and the Mossad, eventually there was the recognition of the nation state of Israel by the Vatican, which was, again, a hugely controversial topic. Of course, a lot of the Palestinian Catholics and the Palestinian Orthodox Christians were unhappy with that move, obviously. But that explains, again, a lot of these machinations as to why the Pope would do these geopolitical moves. Under John Paul II, for example, there were the intelligence structure was beefed up massively. I mean, the Vatican has its own intelligence agency under the Vatican Secretary of State. It's a very kind of secretive thing. Nobody knows all the details about how it works, but it's structured like it's a microstate, so it's structured like other countries. Anyway, long story short, I'm just trying to say that it's really no different when it comes to the way that, say, the CIA operates. It's just more of a microcosm, a smaller version of that. And these organizations, whether it's the Vatican, whether it's the American government, whether it's the EU, all of these have an overriding game plan in goal that they're all being moved towards. And it's not just to have more fiat money and to rip people off. There's a long-term strategy to move everyone to less population, more technocratic control. That's why the AI tech control grid never stops. It doesn't matter who goes into the presidency, who's elected senator or whatever, that marches forward no matter what. We never get a change because people still haven't figured out. I was watching, that guy that Alex played the clip of discussing the riots in Ireland, and it's still, the incompetent politicians that are so incompetent, the boobs, they're crazy, they're incompetent, the weak liberal left. It's not the liberal left that are weak. Like, I don't know why it's so hard to convince people that this is a 100-year-plus strategy. Count Kudenov-Kalergi has a book called Practical Idealism. In the book, he says we're going to erase all the European peoples by creating a giant mongrelized race. You can take that out with him if you think that's mean to talk about it. And it's not just Carol Quigley. It's also the old boys that says that the OSS and the CIA and the Royal Society elites adopted Kalergi's plan. And it wasn't just Kalergi's plan, it's also Lord Lionel Curtis's plan for a Commonwealth of Nations, which would be a kind of Fabian socialist structure for the West. that same plan combined with Count Kalergi's plan is the plan to bring down the West, to integrate it into an overall technocratic structure for each of the continents. That's the plan. And it's been said many, many, many times over. In fact, there's a whole section on Kalergi in the book here, this new book that I just read. It's not new, it's from 1992, but new to me. And it admits everything that I pointed out, but it says the only thing that they disagreed about was Kalergi didn't want the OSS and CIA running it. He didn't want Donovan and Dulles and those people running his plan for the destruction of Europe. But you have to understand that the Concordat, all of that, even after Mussolini set up a Concordat with the Vatican, the EU project is literally the OSS project. All of the people running and setting up the OECD and all that stuff, the European steel stuff, that's all set up by Jan Smuts and people from the OSS and CIA. It's Donovan and Dulles and those characters who are literally running the whole thing. So it's not Hitler that sets up the EU. He had a plan for it. He wanted his version of it, of an EU. That would have been obviously a Reich fascist version of it. But when he lost World War II, the OSS and the CIA said, no, we're going to use this other Kalergi model of how to integrate the EU into a socialist operation that would erase the European people groups in terms of their tribal ethnicities and turn them into a giant mongrelized blob. And the best way to do that is through massive Islamic importation. They said over 100 years ago that they would import massive Islamic peoples to destroy and degrade and get rid of all of the European people groups. And the reason for that is that the European people groups are too, they have too much, there's too much of a barrier. They're too strong of a people when they're who they are, that they have to be brought down in this way. And in fact, they particularly pick out people like the Irish as well and the Scottish, who are the most dangerous and the most devastating to this New World Order plan. That's why they had to be cucked first. And it's wild when you read because they even discuss it this way. In fact, Kalergi says his idea is that there will be a Jewish supremacy over the EU and over the world as a result of this mongrelization. So Kalergi was talking about chain migration, talking about the replacement plan 100 years before the UN or anybody else. I mean, not 100 years, but 100 years before today's UN plan was talking about, right? The UN plan of 10 years ago, that's probably 100 years after Kalergi's 1910-20 book, whenever he wrote it. So you just can't have this normie Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles mindset that it's just the incompetent libs. It's the incompetent libs. We've been hearing this. I've heard this my whole life. Just vote the rascals out, until we realize that there's an entrenched power structure that's corporate, it's private, it's in government, but also above it, that has a plan. Like, nothing's going to change. When are we going to get over being called conspiracy theorists? And then, of course, if you talk about conspiracy theories, then it turns into all the ridiculous stuff like Spielberg's Aliens and all this nonsense, which is a bunch of rabbit trails and disinformation and boomer psyops to dupe. I mean, the boomers only cared about JFK and aliens, and then QAnon. That's like the three boomer conspiracies that you're allowed to believe in, but they stop there. They can't go past that. But it's disheartening, of course, to see so many people get easily led off into fake conspiracies and rabbit trails and nonsense. And the stuff that I'm telling you about, this is the real conspiracy, right? This is the real, the WASP Zionist alliance. That's the real conspiracy, when the CIA started to align itself more and more with Israeli interests, rather than trying to use Arab interests or create pan-Arabism, Arab nationalism. I'm not saying that that makes Islam good. In fact, it's the Israeli plan and the British plan that favors the usage of radical Islamic groups as proxy forces anyway, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc. That's an old strategy. In fact, the OSS, British intelligence, was using the Muslim Brotherhood from its very inception. The CIA was trying to use the Muslim Brotherhood to overthrow Assad Sr. in the 1940s. That was a failed operation, but you see how they just do the same thing over and over. And in fact, in the Ukraine, as I said, the OSS was trying to use the Bandera boys. That's Stepan Bandera. That's the sort of a Nazi character that is looked up to by many of the Ukrainian neo-Nazis. They used that Galenorg network and the Stepanek network to try to overthrow the Russians after World War II. And I'm not saying that makes the Russians good. I'm trying to say that there's no easy, like, good guy, bad guy in these scenarios. And if you want to understand how to have real change, you have to understand that you're actually against a super international banking corporate elite that utilizes intelligence agencies as their sort of operatives and their busy bees. That's the only way to understand. How are you going to fix things if you can't diagnose the problem? You're just going to be chasing the goobers that stand as the frontispiece, right? You're gonna be chasing the politicians that come and go. You'll vote the rascals out, and you never look at the real power structure, which is this that dominates the entire 20th century. It's the same people that are still in power, right? All the boomers haven't died yet. This older boomer power structure, they're conceding some of that to the tech elites, to the tech oligarchs, but they're still in power. They're still there. Yeah, Rockefeller's dead, Kissinger's dead, but this structure that they've set up is the normal structure, the normative structure that's still there, right? And although, Trump had some good moves originally against this power structure, he now seems to be fully on board with supporting most of what this power structure, this old boomer banking Zio network has had for so long, until we realize that the Federal Reserve and all of these operations are essentially structures of control, structures of slavery, debt slavery. It doesn't go away. Now, the Cold War obviously takes up a big portion of this book, and I'm not going to rehearse all the Cold War stuff because we've covered it so many times. But the Cold War begins with Stalin not accepting the Marshall Plan aid, and the purpose of the Marshall Plan aid was to make sure that Russia would kind of do what the West wanted, and that they would be built up with Western industry, et cetera. But they had to go along with what the West wanted to have. Automotive parks and to have industry and all that. And so when Stalin rejected that, that begins that kicks off the Cold War, and the CIA writes memos that pretty much exaggerate the capabilities of what Stalin could do. But what this does is that it entrenches and sets up a massive secret government power block through the excuse of the Cold War, whereby you have, particularly 1945 to 1947, a bunch of Wall Street lawyers, a bunch of bankers, and a bunch of CEOs that dominate the CIA throughout this period. Avril Harriman, Alan Dulles, Bill Donovan, John J. McCloy, et cetera. And it's the excuse of the Cold War that allows for basically anything and everything. The ends justify the means. So we're going to set up the entire structure of the future surveillance networks that would dominate the world. You notice that all the tech that we have, the computers, the internet, all that comes out of the Cold War, right? ARPANET, DARPANET, those are cryptographic communications networks that come out of the Cold War. How can we send information from one place to another through computers that the Soviets can't intercept or whatever, right? Well, the problem is that the Cold War is the justification for the erection of today's tech dominant surveillance world that we have. And you can debate as to how far a lot of these Cold War people thought that was going to be the case. Some of them actually are pretty explicit about it, right? Miles Copeland says, yeah, a lot of this is basically bringing us to a new world order. And the new world order will be one where we're depopulated and we have, tech running everything. And that's because he cites people like Bertrand Russell and H.G. Wells and other people who said that we're going to have out of this Cold War a final conflict that leads to this culmination of a one world government, one world religion, technocratic order. H.G. Wells has a book way before any of this. I want to say 1920 called God, the Invisible King. He says the religion of the future, when it's one world order, will be a socialist world order where we worship Lucifer. God, the Invisible King. He says that in the book. And he was one of their main propagandists for this outfit, for this group that I'm talking about. But throughout the Cold War, they learned all kinds of things like how sexual operations and honey traps, how that can degrade people and degrade nations. You have people who had done this before, like Kenji Dahara in Japan, who had figured out how to degrade China through networks of prostitutes as spies and using opium to degrade China. And then the British did the same thing that the Japanese did with the opium trade. But a lot of the Cold War studies and Cold War operations, for example, the KGB, they were very adept at finding and figuring out who was faking gay in the American establishment. And I mean, literally faking gay. And so they would send gay prostitutes to people. And most of their successful operations throughout the Cold War in terms of espionage were just finding out who was gay in a position of power. And then you blackmail them. And then you've got the secrets about military tech or whatever you're after. But it also becomes a scientifically studied project of perfecting the technique of using sex as a way to not just control an operative, but to control a people, to debase the people, right? So sexuality being used as a weapon in terms of mind control and MK Ultra, which partly has to do with studying people who were prostitutes or using sex operatives in these types of operations. That's all part of an adjacent to what I'm talking about with the Cold War producing not just mass surveillance, but mass psychological operations. Think about Epstein as something like that, where they're trying to perfect, and a lot of the emails with Epstein showed this, they're trying to perfect and understand how can we, use with some of these women. This is particularly the Gino Yu emails between Epstein and Gino Yu. They're discussing basically fracturing girls that they've taken in, studying how far they've gotten in what they call the process. And this has to do with getting them to become better and better obedient operatives, right? Literally almost like, it made me think of the Black Widow, the Scarlett Johansson Marvel thing where she's like the Russian spy assassin, but I think they wanted her to be a sex operative too. I'm going from memory. I haven't seen that movie in a long time, but it's basically like that, like an Epstein style handler sex operation where what Epstein seemed to want to be able to do. I mean, he was into many things, but one of the things he wanted to do was kind of figure out some kind of process to take the girls and turn them into like the perfect, sex operatives or whatever. Makes me think of like, Austin Powers, right? Remember when Austin Powers was fighting, like Heather Graham was one of these robot sex operatives. So it's like Epstein wanted to be Austin Powers or something and control the girls like they were Heather Graham sex bots or something. But anyway, that's actually it sounds crazy, but that's actually what was going on. And all of that to say that the Cold War is producing this information, this research. It's not accidental that, for example, I think it's the IDF, they used to beam into the areas of Palestine like crazy, ridiculous, hardcore porn. And they were doing that to do psy war and culture war, right? That was a way to debase the culture to make them more pliable. This is just an old technique of, applying putting the prostitution houses of ill repute all around your enemy's military bases. And then when the troops and the generals sleep with the 304s, you got pillow talk, you got information. I mean, in fact, in World War II, Churchill did this. Churchill found this is in the Old Boys book, Churchill utilized a French house of ill repute and got a bunch of dirt and information on the German soldiers when they would visit the French prostitutes. I want to say there's a movie that even kind of hints at this. It's a French movie with Sophie Marceau called Secret Agents, and it's about the French resistance and women that were recruited by British intelligence to be not just spies, but also honey traps. So it's a pretty good movie, by the way. But to go back to summarizing the text, I mean, there was all kinds of crazy stuff that again is a pattern for and a window into how the world's really run. And that's kind of what I always try to focus on my channel, is explaining to people and breaking down these big global elite texts. They're not conspiracy texts. They're texts written by the elite that academics and international studies people, international relations people are going to be reading. These are not books that are typically written for the public. And that's why if you can break it down and make it clear to the public, then people have a window, an idea about how the world really works. In fact, some of the people that were involved in MK Ultra, like Sidney Gottlieb, there was an amazing section in the book where he discusses that Gottlieb also developed these biopoisons and these bio techniques to try to kill Castro, which wasn't successful. I think there was multiple 8 or 10 attempts by the CIA to kill Castro that failed, but they were actually successful in killing Patrice Lumumba with one of these Sidney Gottlieb created concoctions. But so I'm trying to explain to you that that's the way the world really works. It works with people being assassinated. It works in terms of, the CIA creating LSD to try to come up with a cultural control mechanism, studying sexual operations to then blast that onto the public at large, to promote trans stuff as a giant psyop. That's how the world really works, and much more of it is intentional than most people think. I'm not saying everything's a conspiracy. You can go off the rabbit hole, off of the deep end into the rabbit hole with crazy stuff. Aliens are a psyop in my view, quite obviously. Spielberg even says that. But this is the real conspiracy, is to create this technocratic order. This is the Alex Jones Show, and I'm your guest host, Jay Dyer. I have Jay's analysis.
Marketing